Before I sail forth into this very off-the-cuff talk, I won't say speech, feel free to interrupt me as I'm going along if one feels the need. But I thought I would mention the derelict Foundry building that we have been agitating over for some considerable time. Dereliction has unfortunately overtaken it. Despite our efforts of circulating, well, everybody down from the Prince of Wales, I think, has had correspondence in relation to it saying, save our building. Nobody's got any money to do anything with it once it was saved, but nonetheless, it was better saved than not. Our efforts fell on deaf ears. It's now derelict near enough. I can't see it being saved in any shape or form now, unfortunately. So it's yet another photograph in the archives. But I have written to Time Team. I suggested that now the site is completely flat, they might find it easier to excavate it on an archaeological basis. So hopefully somebody there may show an interest this time. But previous correspondence I've had with them has always said that everywhere in the country wants a dig in their backyard, so I don't think the chances are very great.
Excuse me, I've remembered. It is about that. I had a word with Sarah Pedley.
Oh yes.
About the very thing about the dig, and she suggested that we contact Fiona Gale.
I see.
And ask if she would be interested in organising, or if she was able to organise a dig there. Which I haven't done yet, because only the other day I got hold of Sarah.
Right, well...
Right, so that's an extra too.
CPAT, who at one stage we thought, Clwyd Powys Archaeological Trust, we thought were quite interested initially. And all of a sudden at the end they sort of fizzled out, and whether they were not able to do anything or they were in the middle of moving offices, and as a consequence no progress was made. And I've just brought this along to remind me, over 12 months ago we were talking about exhibiting local finds locally, you know, because there are a lot of people interested in local historical stuff. And I did get in touch with Kevin Mason at Bodelwyddan. Is it Bodelwyddan? But it wasn't Bodelwyddan. And yes, they have the facilities to exhibit articles of value. He said he would be quite happy to talk to us about it. But since then we've not really made any progress. I've chased where different items are scheduled or deposited, and I've not yet got a comprehensive list. I don't know whether my friend at the back has a list. No, Sarah Peevel is probably the one then. I think I have actually asked her, but no response was forthcoming.
Follow it up on that one.
Shall I kick off on my talk? It was called Why Me? I volunteered myself rather foolishly. Thinking back some substantial number of years ago, I and my good lady went to the hall just down here when we had a meeting with Chris Ruane, Anne Jones and sundry odd bods, and Chris thought it was an excellent idea that somebody should start an archaeological society and an environment society group. On that night, names were put forward, and some miserable so-and-so from down the back nominated me for a treasurer's job, and I've since been trying to resign without success. Well, that's how it came to be me, and I've stood in for Mr. Baker, who I presume it was a last-minute contingency meeting, or had it been planned 6 months ago, and his diary's as bad as mine. No comment, she said. So that's why me. Now people, I have become very interested in Redland. Would anybody like to hazard a guess how long I've lived here? It feels like more than a lifetime. Any ideas?
15 years?
20 years.
Just a little bit longer than 50, no, not quite 20 years yet.
Oh, about the same time as me.
But I was born in Catrovely, not in Redland, That's what they used to call maternity hospital at H.M. Stanley. I panicked when I found a birth certificate with my name on because it said Cottrelli. I thought, my God, I was in a children's home or something when I was born. No, it wasn't. It was the name that H.M. Stanley Maternity Home had at the time. Apparently my mother had been wandering round the street, had been shopping in Rill when the pangs of birth appeared, so she leapt on a bus, as you do, to H.M. Stanley, where I was delivered one Sunday just before midnight. So I'm a Sunday's child, which could explain a lot. Who's laughing at that?
Yes. In those days, long ago in the buses.
So I'm very nearly born and bred here. When I was born, I ended up living in Gronan, which is not a million miles away. Strangely enough, in Abbey Drive. We've got an Abbey Lane down here, overlooking, funnily enough, the old Abbey. I was there for the first 5 years of my life. I recall very distinctly VE Day with a hedge, a privet hedge it was, bedecked with red, white and blue bows. I also remember the POWs working in Raby Farm Field, just across the road with their yellow diamonds on the back of the uniform, haymaking. But I wasn't taking very much of that in at the time. But I was quite an independent child. I was left very largely to my own devices. I moved to Prestatyn when I was about 5, 6, and I went to Marine Road School, CP school, just down the road from where Williams was teaching at one stage in his life, so I followed her around as well. And the staff, well no, that's later on actually, came on to the Rill Grammar School, again, only down the road, well remembered by a lot of people here, I'm sure. And my connection with Redland was further fostered there, because most of this, well not most, a lot of the staff hailed from Redland. And I can distinctly remember Miss Evelyn Homer Beckett, who is now sadly in a home, or as I put here, Ma Beckett. Bill Fizz, does anybody remember him? Caridwen Williams, was it? Joe Pegg, Ted Mesham, most people will know him as. He had problems with his legs. I heard tales about him when he was a child. Apparently his father made a little truck, the equivalent of a soapbox I suppose in its day, a wooden base with pram wheels on it, and he used to play with all the other kids. They used to push him round on the truck so that he could join in. He was a lovely fella actually, frightened the pants off me in school, but he was a nice bloke. And he was heavily involved in archaeology within Redland. And of course Stan Jones, lots of people may remember him. I won't say too much because a lot of it wouldn't be polite. I didn't rate him as a teacher. Appearing with his pipe in his mouth and retreating to his little room at the back of the classroom saying copy pages so-and-so to so-and-so did not really measure up to teaching in life. However, that was how he taught, and I suppose we got away with it. Then I went to Liverpool University. Progression of life. In the olden days, one was set on a pattern of education. You went through the system, you were streamed into science or arts, you were streamed into classes as to your ability. I was in the B stream because I ended up in science as opposed to arts. And ever since then I've said that was the wrong subject for me. I should never have gone into science. But I did 2 years at Liverpool, learning that I didn't know anything about chemistry. And at the end of 2 years they offered me the choice, either go now or later. So I went. But in those days it was a happy event because there was plenty of work available for people who on my age, 20, just about 20. Came back home a little bit remorseful, having wasted 2 years, I suppose, but there were job opportunities, and I went to Martin's Bank in Prestatyn. I would say that I rather relished the idea of working in a bank, because they opened the doors at 10 and closed at 3, and I thought, that's a short working day. Sounds quite attractive, and you get holidays as well. So I went to Martin's in Prestatyn, sat down with the gentleman manager, who was known to my parents.
Internship, they call it now.
What, working in the bank? I've heard it called other things. And he sat me down and interviewed me, and basically he said, if you see an empty shop, do you go and ask who's going to take it over? And I thought, what a stupid question. I said, no. Oh, he said, well, you won't make a good bank manager because you've got to be on the lookout for new business. And virtually that was it, that was the end of interview. I came up to see Geo Fawkes at NatWest National Provincial in St Asaph. Very traditional Welsh gentleman, very Welsh. And I remembered my man as he came into the room, and I stood up, which impressed him no end. He had a chat to me, and I sort of went through my history. And he said, yes, we'll consider you for a job. You'll have to go for an interview in London. I went to see Mr Davison in Old Bishopsgate in London. And equally, he frightened the pants off me. But I got through the interview. And because I'd got some O-levels, I got 12 months seniority on the salary scale. So I was appointed on a vast salary of £376 a year. And there was no looking back from that, was there? So then I was to find out where I was going to work. So living in Prestatyn, I presumed it's got to be local. And I did end up in St Asaph branch, but they operated the Dizzath sub-branch. So I called in at St Asaph on the allotted start date. Go to Dizzath, where Alf Cooper will look after you. And I spent a very happy 18 months there. Enjoyed it very much with Alf. Came back to St Asaph branch, and believe it or not, I was operating the sub-branch in Redland, or the agency. So I was here 3 days a week, and a lot of people, Reg Davis has commented, oh, you know my dad then. I've got a vaguest recollection of that. I remember John Roberts' dad. He used to come in near enough every day. Remember him. I remember Nitmesh, because he used to do their wages. And funnily enough, I've still got a contact with Nitmesh. I'm trying to get some photographs of staff from when they were there, but I've got a couple of bits of their history. All the names sort of fell into place when I came back here again, you know, the names that I knew when I was working. But it was a good time, it was friendly. We had a guard then, Mr Baker, retired Bobby from Triast, in a Ford Thames van. Took your life in your hands if you drove with him. But he was a big, he was a typical Bobby actually, big red-faced round fella. But he was a nice bloke. And he was the guard, you know. In case of trouble, he was the one that would sort it out. God forbid that somebody should arrive with an arm of some description. There'd be no chance whatsoever. But that connection sort of revolved round and round and round. And during that period, strangely, I met my wife-to-be. She wasn't my wife straight away. She sort of, I went in for a probation period. And the strange thing is, Jean's dad, Reg, had a sweets and tobacconist on Bastion Road in Prestatyn, next door to the VP school where Gwilym had been. My mum had the flower shop in the Palladium in Prestatyn. Now Reg's, let me think, Reg's aunt lived in Church Street, Miss Hayway, lived in number 8. Reg's sister married Gwilym Roberts, or as he was known, Gwil Chin. Large lantern jaw, again the locals will remember him probably. Lived down Princess Road in Begins with H, the name of the house, on towards the bottom of Princess Road. He was called other things as well, I understand. So that, you know, Redland was sort of knitted into my soul one way or another. In the early years at home, I have a stepbrother. Well, no, I had a stepbrother, he's dead now. And he was like the old man, he was very much into motorbikes, motorsport. Sunny Redland District Motor Club. He was involved in it because it had an engine somewhere in it, either between your legs or in front of you, one or the other. He lived, died and breathed damned engines. As a consequence, I hated the damn thing. Couldn't stay far enough away. But his son, motorbike rider, and he rode occasionally. Trials riding was the sport in those days. They hadn't got to scrambling. So all the little nooks and crannies round here where you could drive a motorbike with difficulty, I used to be at the weekends. And I ended up as one of the sort of checkers standing by as I got splattered with mud and guff and all sorts, marking them for dabbing, continual dabbing, or a clear run through. Marking them off at the tender age of 8 or 9. And the other thing that I remember truly is the old man never left house without the toilet roll. That was a habit he'd acquired over years, and the very thought appalled me. But I saw an awful lot of Redland District. That was the water splash, I remember particularly, which was across the Clwyd up towards St Asaph. They used to ride through that thing. My stepbrother, he worked at Gittins Garage for a spell, after he'd worked in Marine Garage in Rill. Then he moved on to greener pastures. I think he was perhaps managed out of a job, shall we say. 1 or 2 question marks. He was like his dad. Agency duties in Redland I've mentioned. And social life, of course. Redland was a wonderful centre, all these little lanes and alleys all round here. So my probationer wife, or probationer wife-to-be, we used to explore them, only seeing the wildlife. And there was the wine particularly was regular. St David's Bridge, just outside St Asaph there, that was another spot we used to go to. And more family connections was the marsh, because my stepfather's niece was Peggy Avlico. Peggy and John ran the pub for many years, and then they went on to Oriel House. And then, I gather, I don't know, but I presume finances overtook them, and they had to relinquish. But sadly she died not so long since, so she was a lovely person, Peggy. Very fond of Peggy, but I did like her with the black hair, not the blonde hair, which she ended up with. We're starting holiday camp. I worked there, Williams worked there. Again, I spent a couple of summers working there, starting off at 6 in the morning, finishing about 3 in the afternoon in the kitchens, stores, being a porter. I could tell a few stories about that as well. In those days, as some of you will remember, milk was delivered not in bottles, or in packets, or in plastic anything, it was in churns. But what size were they?
10 gallons.
10 gallons, was it?
10.
They were heavy.
Yeah.
Because we used to sort of have to take them off the wagon when they were delivered in the morning, store them in the fridge obviously. They had to be stored, stacked one on top of the other. And lifting those damn things off and on the heap and trying to keep them in rotation was no joke. I do remember being summoned to the still and they asked for a churn of milk. Went into the fridge. We had to check it up before it went out to the kitchen, took the lid off, I nearly passed out. It was a green heaving mess of milk in there, it was absolutely disgusting. And I also lost a bit of weight because I was hurling around underweight sacks of potatoes like there was no tomorrow. I took sandwiches round to the various bars in the camp on the little Slingsby truck, 2 wheels in the middle and a handle at either end, so that you did that with it. which was very useful when you got sandwiches on trays in the middle. So if it went over a bumpy bit, the trays used to leap around, and either the fillings fell out or the trays fell off. Well, you couldn't go back to the kitchen and say, look, I've dropped all these sandwiches on the floor. Can you do some new ones? So I used to pick them up, put them back together again, take them to the bar. They sold, nobody ever complained. A lot of the holiday makers were self-catering, I suppose that could explain it. Well, it was happy times. There was a lad there who lived down the coast. He had many similar experiences. And then thinking about another area for courting, Kevin Caves. We've all been there, haven't we?
Yeah.
Kevin
I
Caves.
Oh, I am.
Pardon?
Okay.
Who said they haven't?
I was at this end.
Well,
When is missed out?
with our little group of social connections from various schools, really, mainly the grammar school, I suppose, with partners, we organised a barbecue in Kevin Caves. It was to be kept quiet because we didn't want an awful lot of people there, because it was quite dangerous getting up to the caves on that footpath, and there's a hell of a drop down the side. And we'd gone along and we got things started, we got music there, and big fire going, quite a few people there. It was all, you know, bring your own booze, home brew, buy your own whatever. And we were enjoying ourselves. Then the rugby club arrived. God knows how they'd found out about it. But of course they'd had a few before they arrived. And on the way out, after a very lively evening, and we were being told, because we'd been given virtual permission by Muriel Taylor, who was well in with the Williams Wins. As long as you're quiet outside and you don't disturb the dogs, there won't be a problem. But if the dogs start, you know, there could be trouble. So we kept quiet, obviously. And then the rugby lads went out and started falling off the edge. We fell out, looked down, saw them down there, thought, what should we do? They'd landed in trees, they were all right, they were giggling, so we left them. Came home. So that was the little other social event we had. And the Bee, somebody will know the Bee Jazz Club, and the Roma in Rill. We used to meet up there. And life wasn't exotic. We used to have coffees, beef burgers, whatever. In the good old days. See-through cups, do you remember those? Pyrex cups, flat, went cold in next to no time.
Your finger got stuck.
Yeah. Beef burgers with tomato sauce and French mustard. And it lasted all night. You just had one coffee and one burger and you were there all night. But it was very pleasant. And the Bee Jazz Club, I remember doing the Penguin all hours of the day and night to the Wall City Jazzmen and sundry other musical people. But we used to go in a group. And our group, there was one very good friend. He was our best man, actually. No, I was his best man. Still very friendly with him. He used to come along, and unfortunately his brother did, and there was an age gap of about 4 or 5 years. And Ego was our friend, Mike Edwards. His brother was called Min. Mike was called Ego, and his brother inevitably was called Min for Minimus. Ego Maximus and Minimus. And we used to dump him by, you know, ritual dumping. We'd sort of tell him we were going to one pub and leave him to make his own arrangements, and we go to another pub. 9 times out of 10 he found us. I don't know how. But he must have catched more lifts in that spell of his life. Sadly, he's died now, the young Min. Anyway, we got married, my wife and I. We decided we did get on. We've been still practising ever since. And in those days, if you threatened marriage to a bank employer, the first thing he saw, much in common with modern times, they used to see pound signs. A staff move meant expenses. If you paid expenses, it was cheaper to move a bachelor than a married man. So I mentioned marriage, and within 2 weeks I was working in Liverpool. Vic Street in Liverpool. It was one of the centres for the import and export trade through the docks. And we had fruit wholesale merchants and all sorts all round the building. Very interesting time. And who should be transferred there? Mr. W.F. Jones of the parish of Redland, Frank Jones, from the Garage family. So he followed me there. He heard that I came from Preston. He was always on with me about Redland. It's no wonder I came back here, is it, one way or another. On my family's business, my mother's business, the flower shop, she started working eventually, having done various jobs. She started, during the war, she was at the house, Broughton, putting the, lifting, she always used to tell me about lifting the radio carcasses up into the fuselage so they could be fitted. That was her job, apparently. But she started work for the business in Prestatyn, which was a fruit and florist shop called Stanton Model Nurseries. Her boss was Olive Griffiths. Her husband was Harry Griffiths. Harry Griffiths is the uncle of John Parry Griffiths of Redland. The Griffiths family in Redland. So wherever I turned, there was a little bit of Redland. Am I boring you?
No.
I've got no bones to dig up or wave about. Turn over. Well, that's really, I suppose, and we moved here 18 years ago, 16 years ago, to look after really mums and dads, or mums. My mum was ailing, had been, I took early retirement. Thankfully we waved bye-bye to the bank at 52 when they offered me, would you like to go? And I said, you won't see me for dusk, give me half a chance. And I came away. I subsequently worked for NOP, National Opinion Polls, doing market research. And I trolled around here doing that for about 10 years. Which I quite enjoyed, meeting people, talking about old times mainly. We should have spent 10 minutes on an interview. I used to be there at least half an hour, get them talking an old person. And the other thing that I would say, which I said to every one of those, older people, get it down in writing. There are so many stories you could tell of your own past or the family's past, need to be preserved. Nobody does preserve it. So when people like me start doing my family tree and my wife's family tree, there's so many gaps it's beyond belief. And if somebody somewhere has written all this information down, not specific, little stories, yarns, details about what families did and how they thrived or didn't thrive, whatever, keep a note of it somewhere. It doesn't matter that you're going to give it to somebody, but in your papers, when you're gone, somebody will be rooting through, and oh, I didn't know that. Isn't that interesting? Must make a note of that. Oh, we'll keep that. In fact, Jean's, whilst we've been clearing out Jean's mum's house, we've come across a couple of little books which her aunt from Church Street kept. And we found a link with a family which has sort of been a question mark over for a long time. Jean brought with her, when she got married, a wooden plaque with a family crest on it. Now she thought it was a Hayway crest, and we've never been able to find out anything about it. And doing the family tree, I've been rooting, and we came across the name Everall, and we did a little bit of rooting. And whose crest is it? It's the Everall family crest, who sort of crept into the Hayways in about the 17-somethings. So, you know, we've been proudly displaying this crest. Auntie Nellie, William's wife, they burned theirs. Didn't have a lot to do with the Hayway family. There was a big family rift. Where have I put my piece of paper? Anyway, some stories. Knitted yarn, where's it gone?
No, it was under that plastic thing.
Maybe it's in the knitters. Knitted yarns was the last bit. Now, some people here are the ones who told me these little stories. Basically, they're little stories that have been told to me in my travels in recent years by sundry people. Lockup. It used to be on the junction of Princess Road and the High Street. Been there for many years, been disappeared for many years, but it was a lockup. And I was told the story of 3 brothers who used to drink in the King's Head. And it was not unusual for them to be absolutely K-eyed before, no time at all. And the village bobby was not a stranger to putting 1, 2 or 3 of them in the lockup when they started misbehaving. And I was told this story that one of them had gone over the top, absolutely K-eyed. Bobby came, put him in the lockup, left him there. The other 2, of course, they'd not had enough to drink, they kept knocking the odd pint back. And because brother was locked up, they were taking out a saucer and a pint mug. And there was a gap under the door. So they were pouring beer into the saucer, pushing it under the door for him. Keep him happy and quiet. Well, that's one way of dealing with it. The old man in the tree. And when the history group first started, I got wind of, or no, I wasn't got wind, I can't remember how it happened. A name was mentioned, it might have been Shirley, Norman Roberts. He used to, well, his dad took loads and loads of photographs of events that took place at the church. And they're now archived. Unfortunately, we didn't get to them before they were archived, but he has given us permission to go and take copies of these pictures, which we did try on one occasion, but we made such noise that we were asked to leave, more or less. Actually, I shouldn't say that. We weren't misbehaving, miss. And there were people seriously studying their family trees, and because we were giggling a bit, looking at all these old photographs and identifying them, it was suggested that we shouldn't have to go. Anyway, he told me a story of the old man in the tree. Apparently just outside Redland, on the way to Bottlewithen, there was an old tree. And there was an elderly gentleman of the road, I can only assume, was living there. He was close to water from the river, of course, and he lived off the land, eating hedgehogs, rabbits, whatever. And Norman's dad was keen to see, the ways of the world, because this bloke was quite happy, he wasn't causing any trouble, problems or anything, he was just living in the tree. And his father took him to see him. And he met him and spoke to him, and he was quite a rational being, but he'd chosen to live that life and he was causing no trouble or distress to anybody. Sadly, I understand that in later years he became very unwell and he died somewhere, he had to find shelter. And he died alone again, but sad story in some respects. But there was a man who lived in the tree in Redland. There may be 1 or 2 more still, I don't know. The elderly sisters. It might have been Norman again who told me about this. Once upon a time, when you were retired, you didn't get massive salaries and pensions like I do now. Huge sums of money rolling in every week and wondering where your next loaf is coming from. There wasn't an old age pension, so what you didn't have, you still didn't have once you retired. And the old age pension came into being, I don't know when.
1930.
Was it the 30s? Must have been around about then, 20s, 30s, whatever. There was 2 old ladies who lived in the cottages, the stone cottages on the right hand side, just before the bridge, terrace. I don't know, can't remember what they called. Penabon cottages. Penabon. 2 old ladies lived there, they'd been in service for many years and they'd retired and hadn't got a lot of money. And the announcement was made about the pension and they got a pension. And they were so delighted that they could actually go out and ask somebody to come in and have a cup of tea with them and they could actually afford it. It was a delight for them. A reflection on times as they were and times now, I suppose.
Times to be.
I mean, cheerful soul you are. Reg told me this one. He's going to smile now because he doesn't know which one it is.
Not the rude one.
No, not a rude one. Yeah, the geese were making a noise in your back garden and you couldn't understand it because A, there shouldn't have been anybody there, which is when they normally make a noise, and you went out, couldn't see anybody, went back in. The geese were still at it when you got back in. And he went outside, there must be something disturbing. And there were two fellas up a tree. And there were two bobbies apparently. They'd been looking for somebody or looking for something, one or the other. And the geese had chased them up the tree. And Red said, "What are you doing up there?" He said, "They tell us how to deal with dogs, but not these bloody things."
The geese are still there?
The geese are still there. They didn't like me either, did they? And another one, far more recently, if you don't mind me telling, Reg, your health and safety man on the site.
Yes.
You know Reg does a lot of work on the agricultural show site to enable cars to actually move on the field. You were, was it last year you were up there, and some bowler-hatted oik came along with a clipboard and pen and started asking about health and safety and instructions, etc. So you looked at him a bit vague, which you can do. You've done it to me. And he said, what's this all about? So he went through what you needed to do and why you should do it, etc. And he said, "I'll leave the forms with you and you can fill them in, I'll come and collect them tomorrow." The following day, the lads that were with him disappeared, left Reg with the job, and this bloke came and said, "Well, have you filled the forms in?" And Reg apologised because, of course, he could only understand in Welsh. And the bloke quickly turned on his tail and vanished, never seen again. Another little story. And it was David told me this one. He lived in Parliament Street, and the coal man had a terrible stutter, I think. That would probably put a name to him. Archie. And anyway, David was sort of went to get some coal to put on the fire, got the stuff out of where it was tipped, and at the same time out came a wallet. So he looked at this and he thought, wallet, got money in it. Whose would that be in the coal tip, the coal cellar or whatever you called it? He couldn't think and looked at it and he thought, it's got to be the Coldens. Anyway, being a good lad, he sort of kept his eye out for the coal man. Next time he saw, he said, "I found this in the coal. Is it yours?" And the bloke looked at it, he opened it up and said, "Aye, it's mine." And he took a fag out of his packet of players, put it in his mouth, lit it, and gave the packet to Dave. Dave said, "Thank you very much, free fag." Got it home, an empty packet. Generosity.
It wasn't Archie, it was his brother.
Was it his brother? The final pièce, Trixie wrote a poem. I don't know what this booklet that we've kind of been donated by Mrs. Began, I think, gave it to us, which we've hung on to. But it's a poem she wrote called Redland High Street, and I thought you might have. Good God. I'll read it through to you, and then I'm going to feel ill and go. It's called Redland High Street. I'll take you a walk along Redland High Street 60 years ago. Time folded his wings by the Parliament building, and everyone I seemed to know. There was very little traffic, but outside the milk house it seemed a livelong day. Stood a Model T Ford in black solid splendour, and the cows made their splay-footed way over the bridge to the fields by the river, come what may. Reminds me of Prestatyn and Penny-Dre. Across the road to us, John Roberts Grocers, run by two handsome sons. Edgar, I can't find him on the census. Edgar, witty, elegant, Ernest, quieter. Ben's good bread and buns. Fashion beckoned from Sister Evelyn's window. Mrs. Davis powered the new inn. Nurse Kershaw, antiseptics, clinics, viral and Ovaltine. The Joneses, Clwyd Cafe, Mr. Davis, old cobbler. William Blinston, butcher, his dog, followed me around as I walked with the papers through sun, rain and fog. William Davis, butcher, famous for quality. Wife, Scots burr on her tongue. Edith, the teacher. Lucy, homemaker, who never had her own. Evans the post, Miss Evans, Baptist. Thin Mr Davis, EBs. Mrs Morris, shop. Son, Edward the barber. I remember these. Mrs Jones, chips once. Vat on the corner. Robert's pot shop next door. Parry's and Williams's steps to the cottages. Richardson, arm of the law. Barlow's in the Mariners move from ale to coddling. Tommy Cookson talks football next door. Bicycles and paraffin, smelly carbide batteries. Doris, frail as a flower. Mr William John Roberts would come from the coal yard. That's my wife's relation. Mr William John Roberts would come from the coal yard, his cart full with coal, sitting sideways. I presume that's him, not the coal. And through a straggly brown moustache, whistling "Lover of my soul." Next door to me, late of the Foundry, lived Mr Edward Evans and his wife. He was handsome and vigorous, but soon to be stricken. Music had been his life. Small and still I'd sit in their parlour, counting each cabinet swan, with its orange beak, and the dogs, white china. Where have they gone? Probably in the animal shop. The car and the carts, the cows and the horses, gone, long gone, but the river runs and my thoughts of the people linger on. End.
Can I just say,
Anybody can answer any of those